And so you might say, well, how can that be? And the answer to that is that, okay, imagine for a minute that the world isn't made out of objects. Imagine that it's made out of patterns, because it is made out of patterns. That's why music is so intensely interesting, because it's a representation of the world as a place of patterns. And a pattern is something that repeats, because otherwise it wouldn't be a pattern. And the only thing you really need to keep track of things that repeat, because there's no point in knowing anything about things that don't repeat. Because what the hell good is your knowledge? So the world's full of patterns. What happens is that that pattern is transformed into a pattern on your retina. It's a pattern of neural activation. And then there's multiple branches from your retina. It doesn't just go one place, it goes lots of places. And each of those places it goes produces its own implementation of that pattern. And one of those implementations allows you to see the world consciously. But other implementations have other functions. So for example, if you show someone with blind sight an angry face, and you record their psychophysiological responses, and you show them a neutral or smiling face, you can distinguish their physiological responses to the angry or fearful face from the happy or neutral face. And the reason for that is that one of the patterns that your retina is picking up is the facial configurations of human beings specifically, because that's really important to us. And that's delivered to a specific part of your brain. It seems to be, at least in part, the amygdala. And what the amygdala does basically is says, this, I don't know, that's not very good, this means this. So it maps that pattern onto this pattern. You don't need to see anything for that to happen, right? You just have to translate the pattern into motor action. Lots of animals see that way. So like when a fly flies by a frog, the frog doesn't see the fly and think, well, there's a fly, and then like nails it with its tongue. It's like the fly flying by pattern activates the tongue sticking out pattern. And it does it in like 1/100th of a second, obviously, because like, have you ever tried to catch a fly with your tongue? It's not easy, but a frog can really do it. And the fact that the frog's visual system is so simple and specialized means that there's hardly any neural connections between the perception of the pattern of the fly and the motor response. Like maybe there's 2 neurons intermediating. And so that frog can nail that fly right now. Whereas you're going to like wait around until you see the fly, and then you're going to swat it, and the fly sees this. And it's like it's gone in a week of fly time by the time you hit the the table with your fly swatter. You don't want to rely on your conscious vision to do extraordinarily fast things, because it takes, under normal conditions, it takes maybe 1/4 to 1/2 a second to become consciously aware of a phenomenological entity. It's like, for snakes or things like that, man, they've bitten you by the time you see them. So what Ledoux pointed out is that to the underlying motivational areas, there's lots of sensory inputs that bypass the representational processing that's characteristic of the cortex. And so if you're walking down a path and like a little snake-like movement occurs here, you're going to catch that with the periphery of your vision. Now, try this. So look at this finger, okay? Now, look at the finger, but concentrate on my face, okay? Don't look at my face. Okay, you ready for that? Okay. Okay, so what do you see? What do you see? Yeah, you see teeth and eyes. And if, like, look again. If you pay careful attention, you'll be able to see that you cannot see my nose. Because who cares what my nose is doing? You don't care. Your amygdala certainly doesn't care, so why bother seeing it? Your amygdala cares about what the hell your eyes are pointing at and whether or not your teeth are there. And it cares about that with other creatures too. And so your peripheral vision, which is low resolution, is wired up to detect movement and threat. And what does the detection is super fast, because, well, it better be or you're going to get bit. Okay, so one day I was in California, and I was walking down this pathway on a cliff facing the ocean in LA. And it was, I think it was March or something, and there was this guy in front of me that was like 6'7", and right in front of him was his 4-year-old daughter. So we're walking along, and all of a sudden she goes, ping, and jumps right onto his shoulders. It was like, you know what a cat's like when you startle it? It just poof, and runs. It's a very funny thing to do to cats. There was a rattlesnake right beside the path. Now, it was kind of slow because it was cold, But obviously what had happened to her is her periphery caught the rattlesnake, and she was up in her father's shoulders before she saw the snake. And it's a good thing, because if it was a stick, well, who cares? She's expended a little energy. You know, so the amygdala can be kind of low resolution and it's still useful. But if it was a snake and it was going to strike, the fact that she had jumped onto his shoulders before she even saw it was going to save her. And so one of the things that, in principle, the underlying motivational systems are wired up to detect are primary fear stimuli. And so those would be, you can kind of list them off. Now, for a long time, people thought you learn to be afraid, which I told you is rubbish. You learn not to be afraid. Then they thought that you could learn to be afraid to some things more easily than others, but you still had to be exposed to those things. And then they figured out, no, there's just things you're afraid of. And one of those things is snakes. And chimpanzees, for example, they don't like snakes. And even if you raise chimps and monkeys so they never see a snake and you show them a snake, they are not happy about the snake. So the snake's like uber predator. You know, I found now that mammals, I should have known this, been around for about 220 million years. So we've been battling with reptiles for a very long period of time, right? Back when there were dinosaurs. Anyway, so the idea that like predatory reptiles are a bad thing, that's way deep down inside of us. And so we have systems that we've conserved as we've evolved, not because they're accurate, but because they're really damn fast. And so one of the things your retinal patterns do is map themselves right onto your spinal cord. And that's super fast, super low resolution. So it means your eyes can make your body move. There's almost no intermediation of thinking. And so the old behavioral ideas that you were a stimulus response machine were right, except that you're a stimulus response machine with a bunch of more complex processors built on top of that. But the stimulus response machine is still there. And the reason it's there is because it's super fast. And so there are these multiple levels of the nervous system, and as you go down into more and more fundamental systems, they're faster and more stereotyped. And as you move up, they're more complex and slower. And the sensory systems have input more or less at each level. And so partly what your brain is trying to figure out is when should you use the quick and dirty systems and when should you use the slow and contemplative systems. And the answer is, if it's a primary fear stimuli, which would be fire, teeth, skeletons, blood, genitalia, generally speaking. Is that it? Immobile bodies. Well, and then there's all sorts of noises, baby cries. Well, for example, we just did an experiment. I told you guys about latent inhibition. Do you remember that? Maybe not. If you listen to a bunch of numbers, and in the background you hear a white noise burst, so it's going shh, shh. So maybe I get you to listen to that for 3 minutes, and I tell you to count your number, okay? Then I play the same soundtrack, and I show you a bunch of lights, and the lights go on one by one. And I try to get you to predict what's turning those lights on. If I make it the white noise burst, and you've already heard that for 3 minutes when it didn't signify anything, it's going to be very difficult for you to learn that the white noise bursts are now what turns on the lights. So the way you determine that is you play people, before exposing them to the lights, one tape that has the white noise bursts, and another tape that doesn't, and then you play both of them, both groups, the white noise burst and the numbers, and turn on the lights. And the people who weren't pre-exposed to the white noise learn it faster by a substantial amount. That's called latent inhibition, and that's what makes things invisible for you. You see things, nothing happens, you learn to ignore them. They're irrelevant. So you're using latent inhibition to eradicate their relevance. We did it with baby cries. People don't develop latent inhibition to baby cries. So if you put little baby cry in the back instead of white noise, doesn't matter how many times you expose the person to it, they learn that the baby cry turns on the lights right away. And so what I'm thinking is that the way that your brain makes things relevant is it makes everything irrelevant except for certain categories of things that you can't learn to habituate to no matter what you do. And those would be the categories I just described. You know, and the fact that genitalia are part of that, especially for men if it's pictorial representations, accounts for the absolutely addictive nature of pornography. So you cannot habituate to the images, although men do to some degree. But it's very difficult to habituate to those images. So